Hi, this is the Countering COVID-19 Disinformation Ask Me Anything. My name is Dan Madden, and I am the National Security Innovation Network Mid-Atlantic Regional Director. I want to also introduce my co-panelists. Mike.
So my name is Mike Jackson. I'm the former Chief for Information Operations Special Activities United States European Command. I'm currently the Senior Army Fellow at Council on Foreign Relations, and I'm the incoming J5 Chief for Plans, Policy, and Partnerships at the Cyber National Mission Force under Cyber Command.
Awesome. JD.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is JD Maddox. I currently serve as the Chief Technology Advisor to the Global Engagement Center. I'm eager to hear what you guys have to say today.
Sam.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sam Stewart. I am a Senior Advisor at the Global Engagement Center. I'll also note I am the Silicon Valley representative, so I'm based in California, where I coordinate with interagency research and technology companies on the West Coast.
Christina.
Hi, everyone. This is Christina Nomura. I'm a director with Park Advisors, which is an implementing partner of the GEC, specifically the Technology Engagement Team, overseeing implementation of the Testbed and Disinfo Cloud. Thanks.
And my friend and colleague, Pat.
Hello, everybody. I'm Colonel Retired Patrick Mohini. I was a Special Forces officer, retired with 30 years of active duty. I'm currently a senior advisor with the National Security Innovation Network, or NSIN. I live and work on Fort Hamilton here in Brooklyn, New York.
Again, I'm Dan Madden. I'll be the moderator today. My own background, served in the Marines, worked on the Hill for a few years, spent a decade at a think tank, and now I'm up here in New York as the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director for NSIN. So Mike, I thought I'd turn it over to you to give you an opportunity to share with the audience what your overall vision for this was and what the challenge that you're trying to solve is.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate that. So I'm not going to reread the statement because I think you guys have all seen that and you've looked at it. But just for context, so I'm a colonel in the Army, information operations officer. Been an information operation officer since 2003, and even before that, one of the things I've struggled with is our ability to assess and evaluate activities in the information environment in closer to real time. So it's a real challenge. And actually, in my year in New York, I've talked to several industry leaders, some marketing companies and others, and it's a problem across the board that we look at. So some of the big ideas that I've discussed with multiple people over the past several years, and also building it into this for use possibly in my next job and coordinate across the interagency. What we're trying to do is understand trends in the environment versus discrete events. What I find right now is we tend to look very closely at discrete events individually rather than understand the context of how they relate to each other. And I'll come back to that here in a minute. Because the disinformation and misinformation that we're seeing right now, we chose COVID as kind of a focus, but recognize that the narratives that we're seeing are not related just to COVID. They're really an evolution of narratives that have been going on since 16, 18, pre-COVID, during COVID, and now post-COVID. You're going to see them continue to evolve going into November and beyond. One of the things I notice is when I talk evaluation, a lot of the companies that I work with or talk to, they look very closely at social media. Much of it is Twitter-based. A big part of that is because of the information that's available. But this problem is actually much bigger than just understanding social media. Social media is important. It does drive the news, but it also has to be recognized as an echo chamber. And certain target audiences are there, but the bigger audience doesn't really determine what audiences matter if you limit yourself just to social media, primarily Twitter. You really don't get what is really going on, and then the broader narratives in the environment, and importantly, how they evolve. So just for context, and then I'll wrap this up here, I mentioned about how the environments change and narratives evolve. So you had the 2018 narratives surrounding the elections, obviously looking at it from a US perspective, not looking at US populations, but looking at how adversaries are trying to influence domestic populations. What we saw coming out of 18 evolved post the election of the current administration. they were related to a lot of different things. They're related to race, they're related to economic factors and everything else. So those are kind of the big trends that we're looking at, and we're seeing them shape. What you see during COVID is you see adversaries and trying to exploit them, also trying to put blame back on the United States. The message that US forces are spreading COVID is probably more of a temporary narrative rather than a long-term one, but being able to recognize those temporary ones, but also how do they fit into the long-term ones. One of the things I've just been thinking about the past 24, 48 hours. So once again, what we're focusing on with this challenge is focused on the narrative surrounding COVID. So I'm not bringing in a whole new thing in here, but I think it's important to recognize how these narratives evolve. When you look at what's just happened in Milwaukee, and then the violence and the riots and the protests that are happening surrounding that, I have no doubt that our adversaries are going to exploit that. When you had the claims in COVID that whether it was the elderly or whether it was disproportionately impacting certain racial demographics, what you're seeing right now with Milwaukee is going to be an evolution of that narrative, and it's going to continue to evolve. You're seeing the discussions of ballots and mailing and voting and impacts on different populations. So what we're looking for something is a tool that can help us understand that closer to real time, so we can pick and choose the narratives that matter and they're having an effect on the audiences that matter to us, and the narratives that don't matter quite as much. So, but once again, that is bringing together the social media piece. It's bringing into some of the other tools that are out there. I see bits and pieces that can do some of this. Something like, if you are familiar with Data Miner, Data Miner doesn't just look at media, it looks at events that are going on in the ground, the protests that were happening right off my balcony last night at the intersections of Chambers and West Side Highway, was coming up on Data Miner. And then the news and the stories that surround that. What's going on in the media, not just in social media, but traditional media, and where they're happening at and closer to real time. Real time probably means 24, 48 hour time period to see where these trends and spikes are going on. And with that, I'll leave it at, and I'm sure that I've created many more questions, which I look forward to answering.
That's great, Mike. Thanks. So I want to take a minute just to review the awards that are associated with this challenge. One is we're going to be running a virtual showcase for Department of Defense Information Operations professionals. We're going to be doing that jointly with the State Department's Global Engagement Center. Also, the State Department's Global Engagement Center has put forward resources to support the testing of a company's or a concepts, capabilities through their technology engagement team's Testbed, hosted by Disinfo Club, and that's worth each one of those tests is worth about 25 test runs is worth about $25,000. You'll also be receiving the Information Professional Association's Order of Hermes. You'll also make available to you a Government Contracting 101 session in Small Business Innovation Research, CIBR crash course provided by the Defense Innovation Lab, and some of our judges and mentors also have MOU authority. So although the MOU itself is not a part of the award package, that's certainly something that could come about as a result of this. So at this point, let's see. Looks like we have a couple of questions from the audience. So the first one I'm seeing, can we play in this challenge if we already have something before the GEC on propaganda detection, or if we have a DoD phase 1 on tech? I'll answer for the DoD phase 1 element. So you can certainly submit, and actually I think that this kind of a challenge can be a good mechanism to actually get access to judges and mentors who in their day job are actually exactly the kind of people that you want to be engaging with to get hopefully MOUs, but at the very least help you on your sort of journey of customer discovery. On the GEC question, JD or Sam, would you be open to answering that?
Yeah, I think the question is, can you apply and participate if you've already received funding through the GEC's Testbed? And I think the answer is we definitely want to see the application. and judge it based on its merits. I don't think there's currently a limitation on additional test runs. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, JD. Second question. In the challenge under operational constraints, could you explain in more detail about the content looking for evaluation of the broader information environment? So, Mike, I think I want to throw that back to you.
I think what we're looking for is what are the key narratives that we're seeing in the environment, and how are they evolving over time, instead of we will continue to look at them as new narratives, but to recognize that it's an evolution. The reason why that's important is to understand effectiveness. Are we doing something effectively to drive the narrative because it's not working for an adversary? Also, is it misinformation that is something that we may not focus on, as opposed to direct, clearly identifiable disinformation that we can understand where it's coming from and what audiences it's aimed at? Once again, that goes back to evaluating where do we want to put our resources. We don't want to apply them in cases where a narrative is not being effective. You don't want to amplify an ineffective narrative and make it effective. But also to understand where are we being effective, and in all honesty, where are we not being effective that we need to reallocate resources. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think so. So there are other questions popping up, but I want to pull back on the stick for a minute and kind of get a little bit more on the State Department's perspective on this. So, JD, could you talk a little bit to how the State Department has been thinking about the kinds of technology that they need for addressing this disinformation challenge in general and COVID-19 in particular?
Yep, absolutely. So we, in the last 2 years, we've set up 3 significant programs that are going really well right now. We have our ongoing tech demo series held usually in DC. Now it's being held virtually on a bi-weekly basis, where we're bringing in technologists to understand what they have ongoing. And we also bring in about 20 different interagency partners to look at the technology and understand what it is and how it can potentially be applied. We also have overseas tech challenges, which are similar to the tech demo series, in that we are bringing in the latest and greatest technologies specific to geographic regions. So had one in Europe, had one in Taiwan recently. And the idea behind that is to apply funding to a specific technology in direct support of a government against disinformation and propaganda in real time. So very concrete. And then the third is our Testbed, which is very relevant to what we're doing right now. The Testbed is the opportunity for our interagency partners to test out specific technologies against discrete technological challenges that they're experiencing with foreign disinformation and propaganda. And so that's the opportunity we're talking about today. All of the information that we're gaining from all of these programs is stored in disinfocloud.com, which you can access through a password. You can apply for that password online. And Christina Nomura, who's on the line as well, is leading DisinfoCloud and can give you more information about that. But in general, we are looking for technologies that, of course, defend against foreign disinformation and propaganda, but very broadly, we're looking at technologies that are scalable, that are neutral to the content that we're seeing. So in other words, it's technologies not judging the ideological bent or bias of the content, but instead judging the inauthenticity technically, and additional factors. And we're looking at both sides of the continuum of the information environment. So both on the supply side, where the information resides even before it has been distributed to a broad community on social media, for example. But we're also looking on the demand side. So we want to find products, technologies that warn people to the presence of disinformation and propaganda in social media and on other platforms, whether that's content flagging or other systems that essentially encourage critical thinking at the point of information consumption. So it's a very broad requirement. We've been looking at everything from blockchain-based content validation to web annotation systems to crowdsourced assessments of journalistic standards, and of course the bread and butter of this environment, which is social listening tools. So that's a very long answer, but I wanted to be as thorough as possible, and so we're looking for solutions that really work. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. Building on that, Christina, would you mind speaking a little bit to the Disinfo Cloud platform and the Testbed capability?
Absolutely. So the testbed that JD mentioned was an outgrowth of the GEC's technology initiatives. Mainly, after technologies have demoed, how do we then assess and validate that they actually do what they say they do, and against real-time use cases? So the testbed methodology was born of that process, in that we work with our interagency partners to identify relevant use cases. We set up a scope of work with companies. We provide 25,000 for each test. And the point being is that it gives us both actionable insights while also showing us how the tool itself works in practice and how it can be applied in other contexts as well. Disinfo Cloud was then born as a complementary process. We needed a way to show our partners, both interagency within the US government, our foreign government partners, but also broadly, we didn't want to limit it. We wanted to show and make sure that tools get in the hands of end users, and those end users could be folks in the private sector, media, journalists, civil society. So anybody that has need for these types of tools can sign up for an account with Disinfo Cloud, and it's like a consumer reports like platform offering assessments of the different tools that we have identified. So there's two separate sign-on processes. The tech vendors themselves can sign up and fill out their profiles. Many profiles actually already exist. So sometimes when a tech vendor signs up, their company or tool might already be there. So we try to link those. But in general, it is meant to be that one-stop shop, showing the different tools and the assessments.
That's fantastic. I want to go back to audience questions now. So from Wasim, we got, can you elaborate further on what effective looks like in terms of COVID-19 disinformation response? Mike, do you want to field that?
Yeah, I can real quick. So I think this tool is part of us. The purpose of the tool is to understand and visualize the information environment, which is something that we're struggling to do. There's pieces and parts of it from different companies and entities that I've seen that do a part of it okay. What we don't have the ability is to really step back, look at those trends, understand where they're coming from, and then causality is extremely hard. You gotta be careful and really don't want to get into claiming causality because there's so many things going on in the environment. But I think a big part of this tool is to help us understand what effectiveness is and to define what effectiveness is. We have measures of performance, we have measures of effectiveness, but we really don't have them aligned with, from my perspective, with the tools that can look at them trends over time to actually understand and explain the result of what the measures of those MOPs and MOVs actually are. This is a piece of it. So there's other parts that we're doing and polling and other things to help do that. But the reason this is essential is to help us understand and define what effectiveness is to the senior leadership, to the practitioners, as well as the senior leadership, so that they can provide recommendations and guidance on how we should move forward, vice the situation where we're in now. Not everybody, in a lot of cases, we're just kind of doing more things because we have another problem, but not really evaluating the effectiveness of what we're doing. You're still muted, Dan, I think.
That was great. Do any of the other panelists want to jump in and add to that? Okay, I guess that was a perfect summation then. Let's see. Another question that I think tends to come up is what's the level of technology readiness that that's going to be competitive for this award? So, is this, is a concept paper just as competitive as a prototype is compared to a commercial product that's ready to deploy right now? Mike and JD, if either of you want to answer what you'll be tending to look for.
This is JD. Sorry, Mike. Don't mean to jump in. From our perspective, every test that we have run has required a system that is actually feasible right now. So something we can actually test out. So if it's a concept paper, it's not going to be testable. And so that's been the stipulation going into every one of our tests. But again, we're very interested in the concept. We want to understand what's going on in this environment, what's upcoming. Regardless, we'd still like to see that information.
The only thing I would add to what JD said is it has to be feasible. You have to be able to touch it and feel it to actually see how it works. But it has to be something that can learn and be developed. That's not a static tool, because from my perspective, what we're seeing in the environment is it's changing so rapidly. This has to be an adaptable tool that can grow and evolve as the problem changes.
Okay. The only thing I'll add to that is we are assessing sort of student projects, academic projects on a different track than we are small business startup products. So you won't be direct, if you're doing something sort of cutting edge and academic, you're not going to be competing against somebody who's has a fully developed commercial product. Go back to the audience. If a solution can be, from John, if a solution can be provided that is slightly different from provisional patent, can I apply this as an idea, single 48-line white paper? Yeah, you can certainly submit it. I think that you're going to be better off if you're in a similar format to the other submissions, which is a 20-slide or less submission that covers the capability, how it relates to the challenge, and a little bit about your team. What contracts, opportunities, or solicitations are expected to emerge in the next month or two that will impact AI-enabled technologies? So right now, the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, as well as some of the other sort of intelligence agencies, have opened their Small Business Innovation Research Awards. So if you just Google Department of Defense SBIR, you'll be able to find a long list of topics and solicitations, and you can search in there against AI to find things that are going to be immediately relevant to you. And then in the fall, during the next SBIR cycle, the Air Force, my expectation is that the Air Force will again be running their open innovation topic. So that will be open to any kind of AI solutions you might have. And then from Matt, a lot of our company's work centers on identifying and pre-bunking missing information by flagging information sources, social media accounts, websites that have repeatedly published disinformation in the past. Monitoring these sites and accounts is a proven way to stay on top of emerging narratives before they reach the mainstream. To what extent is this challenge concerned with identifying propaganda sources as a way to zero in on the actors that are pushing disinfo narratives? Mike, you want to take that?
Yeah, thanks. So I think first off, absolutely. And I think the three elements, the core elements we'd be looking for. One is, what are the key narratives? What is the attribution, the source of that narrative? And then what target audiences are those narratives focused on? I think that's kind of the fundamental piece that I would be looking for, that we look for in this.
Okay. I think I want to generalize one of the earlier questions. So what is the market opportunity for people developing these capabilities, particularly within the Department of Defense, but also state, and how you folks view that more generally? Mike, I know that I keep picking on you, but do you mind speaking about that for a couple minutes?
So this is one of the main reasons why I started partnering with the GEC, and I'm glad to see the TET evolve, is what we do need. I don't think we need to be limited to a certain set of tools, but I do think that we need to have common tools that we're using to share. I talk about leaders making decisions, common tools that provide our leadership and decision makers a common picture. So I think if it's a quality tool and it works, I think there's a lot of desire to have something that we can share across, so that we're seeing the same common operating picture of the information environment.
That's great. Sam, I haven't picked on you. Would you mind speaking to how you're seeing the market for this sort of countering disinformation, for those kinds of capabilities, how that's evolving, what you're seeing?
Yeah, great. So I think I would add to that, I think JD echoed a little bit of how the bread and butter of this is social listening tools, but I think here at the GEC, we've actually looked at different technology solutions. I think in addition to that, there's ad tech tools. I think there's dark web monitoring tools. There's, we've seen some use cases of apps that have blockchain-based authentication tools for photos and videos. I think, one of the things that I hear us all echoing is the idea of adaptability, that, the problem set as we see it now will definitely change. And as bad actors understand the tools that we are implementing, they will change their methods. And so, unfortunately, the problem will probably persist for the near term, but I think making sure that we are trending on the way that these narratives are emerging and proliferating, and making sure that our tools are adaptable is going to make for a wide market in the near term.
That's great. So it seems like DARPA's Metaphor and Semaphore programs are relevant. Who are the, aside from DARPA, who are the early adopters, both within the Department of Defense, state, and the interagency more broadly? If you are a small business, a startup that's developing this capability, who should you be reaching out to? Mike or Sam, I want to open it up to either of you.
Well, the one thing I would say, and I think we've echoed this once, is I think a great place to reach out would be to GEC, because, as mentioned before, Disinfo Cloud, and again, Christina can add more information about this, is basically our repository of, I think at the moment, it's over 150 tools that have a focus on, disinformation and countering foreign propaganda. And so I think that's one of the great locations to have your tool included within. So people, around the world who are witnessing these problems can actually go to that as a resource to align the issues they're seeing in their environment to the tools that are out there that can be of potential use. So I think, we tend to see that people who are experiencing these issues are on a spectrum. There's definitely some people who are more adept at countering these issues. And then there's also people who maybe are more novice. And the one thing that's great about having an online repository is it lays out kind of the options that are out there. And you can actually pick and choose of what those capabilities are to then match the need that you are seeing in your specific region. And so hopefully I got all that right with the numbers. I think it's over 150 tools at this point. And I know that there are, multiples of that in the users that are inside the tool.
And just to reinforce what Sam just said, for the past 5 years, I've gone to the GEC and supported the GEC because, one, we need a repository of where these tools are at, but also we need a network of professionals that can come together, communicate, and understand how we're approaching the problem and share and understand the tools that are out there. So that's why, once again, I'm very excited to see the GEC and TET evolve the way they are, because I think it's exactly what the 2017 NDA said, which is why that's probably the best place to go.
Dan, you're muted.
Great. Great answer. Again, for the audience, if you want to submit questions, feel free to use Zoom's Q&A functionality. If you just scroll over the bottom of your Zoom interface, you should be able to see the Q&A pop up. So from Wasim, it says, I was under the impression this was a COVID-19 disinformation specific call to action and disinformation. Is that a critical focus area and immediate need? Mike, I'll let you catch that.
Yeah, so the way I would describe it is when it comes to evaluating and creating a common picture of the information environment, there's just so much data out there. The only way to do this, and the companies and individuals that I've been are the ones that are able to isolate the data and sort through smaller bits instead of trying to look at everything. We picked COVID as the problem for the exact same reason, rather than just say, hey, give me a tool to understand the information environment. We looked at, and like I had said before, there was the narratives pre-COVID, during COVID, and how they're evolving right now with Milwaukee and everything else, and how they're going to evolve post-COVID. We use COVID as a subject to isolate that conversation, but recognizing this is a tool that looks at trends over time, not related to any single discrete event or problem.
Dan, you're muted again.
All right, I'm just gonna leave myself with a hot mic. So another question that we got was, can we see the current tools available? And it seems like Disinfo Cloud's a great platform for looking at that, but to what extent, if you are a company rather than a US government entity, can you actually get visibility on what the competition looks like by looking at what's available on Disinfo Cloud? And I guess to sort of hit on John's point a little more directly, what are the baseline capabilities that we're working with right now? It's kind of hard to know whether or not you've got a great pitch to make to the Department of Defense or State Department for that matter, if you don't really understand what the current state of the art is. I'll open that up to the whole panel. Well, actually, let me take that back. Christina, do you want to start by talking to the Disinfo Cloud piece, and then we'll open it up from there?
Sure. So in terms of access to Disinfo Cloud right now, there are two separate sign-on processes. Tech vendors themselves do have a separate one so that they can fill out and update their profile as their technology further develops. Of course, though, we don't want to necessarily limit that, and we're happy to share information broadly on the different types of tools available. For general users, that is open to both US government and foreign government partners. It's open to researchers, academia, things like that. So it's not necessarily closed off to them either.
Okay, great. Do any of the other panelists want to speak to sort of the baseline capabilities across the U.S. government?
Hey, this is JD. I mean, there's such a range of different technologies. It's very difficult to sort of summarize this in a quick call. You know, again, if we focus on social listening tools, there are more than 1,000 out there. And they all have varying degrees of application against the problem of disinformation and propaganda. What we're finding is that, you know, the best tools in this area are the ones that have significant data holdings and have the right analysts working the systems with expertise in disinformation and propaganda to go after the data problem. You know, others that are sort of dabbling in this area don't typically have the expertise built into their systems to really go after it. But that's a really, you know, blank statement about all those tools. And then on, you know, when we're talking about, you know, blockchain-based content validation or web annotation systems, these are very specialized systems. And, you know, some of them are really just emerging right now as useful tools. So it's certainly a competitive market. You know, and we're always eager to see new tools coming online and understand exactly what they are.
Another question we got. It seems there are 20 different tools out there. Actually, sounds like a lot more than that. That are not able to keep in a focus the disinformation campaign at once for its short period of engagement. So, how much is this refining what tools? How much is this challenge addressing refining what tools are already out there, the kinds of capabilities that they already provide, to try and find the signal versus the noise, and stay focused on the signal? Or is this creating your own monitoring structure? Mike, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so I use the example frequently of the number of contractors I had in my office when I arrived at UConn vice the number of contractors that I had in my office when I left UConn. And it was about 5 times the number, because I believe, I think you're really onto something. I'm not convinced that this is a product that's going to be a one-stop shop. I think it's a collaborative tool, probably. And that's why when Dan and I began talking about this, and also with the GEC, that we've been trying to figure this out for a while, and then to bring it out to the individuals who are developing and thinking about this, how do you pull it together? I mentioned things like Data Miner earlier. I think Google Cloud has a piece of it. They've all got a piece of it, but no one of them has all of it. And just to be honest, sometimes when you work with the larger companies, they try to talk you into a product because they've got one that fits. And then there's any number I could name, but I won't right now. But when I talk to the innovators, you guys that are thinking about it, you're able to build something that's a little more adaptable. And also the collaboration is a possibility that I think that some individuals in this room could overcome quicker. And also I do realize I continue to keep saying Milwaukee versus Minneapolis. And that's, so I'll refocus myself on where the problem is at and where it's coming from.
That's great. On the collaboration front, and so it seems like Disinfo Cloud is a great platform to get a better sense of what's out there. Our own countering disinformation community on the innovatedefense.net, I hope also becomes sort of a mechanism for facilitating both collaboration across industry, but also more broadly across the disinformation community. Once you register at that site, you'll be able to see who else is a part of the disinformation community on the site. And in some cases, those will be Department of Defense subject matter experts that you might want to engage with either as a part of your journey of customer discovery or in pursuit of a MOU, or to just kind of get a better sense of what the department's needs are. Let me see. So another question from the audience. Europe has several disinformation centers focusing mostly on Russia. What European tools and successes can America build on, including approaches for inoculating a public against disinformation? So this sort of goes beyond the central topic that we're looking at here, but it is an important question. So again, Mike, I'm going to turn to you on that.
So we need a tool that's adaptable. So I've mentioned I spent much of the last 5 years in Europe, clearly focused on the Russia problem set. We did recognize China's growing there towards the end and started to pay more attention with it. But during my time, worked very closely with the Europe and Eurasia Bureau, Department of State, and the GEC. The three of us have very close relationships with centers of excellence in Helsinki, in Riga, developing with Tallinn. Also relationships in the UK with the PGHQ, MOD, 77th Brigade, and also very extensively in Ukraine, as well as Bulgaria, Greece, and some other countries. Trying to learn lessons from each other, but yes, the problem there is very, very Russia focused, but we are trying to learn, and those relationships do exist. And in all honesty, a lot of the conversations that I was having with the centers of excellence or with the Brits was, what tools are they using? How can we share and learn from each other? What approaches are they using to counter disinformation? How can we share and learn from each other? So I think that also goes back to the earlier question of what are the potential for some of these tools to be used broader, or talking with the partners and the allies that I've worked with. I think there's a lot of potential there as well, because we are watching each other and learning from each other. And we're also approaching the problems a little bit different. I think if you look at Estonia, they're probably one of the best that's dealt with media literacy, and cyber operating effectively in the cyber environment at the individual level. But also they've got a little bit of different problem set because the population is different. They've got different background, different culture. But we are watching and learning from each other.
JD, do you have any thoughts on this that you want to add?
I defer to Mike. Mike's definitely the pro on the Europe issue. From the GEC's perspective, we have a dedicated Russia-focused team, and that's our focus on Russia is, of course, contributing to our interest in this COVID-19 related counter-disinfo effort. We recently issued our so-called convergence assessment of how the Chinese and Russians are potentially collaborating on issuing COVID-19 related disinformation. So we're definitely invested in finding solutions related to the Russia problem, and we are well connected into all those centers of excellence that Mike talked about, and we want to learn from them. They're very different social and political structures in place for the US versus Europe. So there are different ways we have to approach it, but we're definitely taking their lessons on board.
Okay, great.
Hey, Dan, can I add one more thing to that real quick?
Absolutely.
I think it's related, but when we're talking about the Russia problem set, the China problem set, the Iran problem set, the CT problem set, the North Korea problem set, wherever the source is, when it comes to the narratives, that's part of it is I think you can't separate the narratives because I think they're all exploiting similar narratives, whether it's race, whether it's economy, whether it's the confidence in the political system. I think they're all exploiting it equally across in the US and Europe. So you can't just say this is a Russia focus, this is a China focus. But that does go why the attribution and the target audience they're looking at is important. But to understand that in the kind of that arc where the narratives are coming together, it really is a merging of all of these narratives. I'm not saying they're coordinated, but I do think that they do naturally reinforce one another and make it, that's why it's such a difficult problem to counter.
Another great question from the audience. Javier asks, have the social media companies been engaged in this effort? Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, etc. I'll just open that up to the panel.
So I'll jump in here. So obviously, we see the social media companies as a key component in obviously reaching the audience and assessing where we see some of the narratives. I think, as GEC's perspective, we've been in contact with them to kind of understand ways they're doing so, both in the outwardly ways that they publish on their blog posts and associated media, as well as getting demand signals from them on some of the gaps they may have in these capabilities. But I think, while there's always a lot of focus and attention on the social media companies, I think we see them as a part of the problem or part of the issue and also a part of the solution. We will continue to kind of work hand in hand with them to assess and kind of coordinate what they are seeing to our efforts. But again, I think as Mike spoke at the top of the hour, I think this is a larger issue with narratives that encompass not only social media, but traditional media and other ways, influencers and other people who are actually working in the whole environment. And so, definitely a part, and definitely, I think, a key part in reaching mass audiences, but only a piece of the puzzle, if you will.
Yeah, that's great. Sam, would you mind talking a little bit to how you're seeing small businesses, startups engage with the sort of big tech and social media? It seems like a lot of them have to actually really have to develop meaningful relationships with them, whether that's data miners' relationship with Twitter. Can you talk a little bit about how you see that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as new capabilities come into the environment, I think I see more and more of companies that are maybe not quite at scale being able to interface with some of these large companies. And I'll talk to something a little more specific. Back in our last Taiwan Tech Challenge, which was actually held in February in Taipei, we had an array of companies who came as part of day one to kind of demo their capabilities. And in that grouping, we saw everything from one of the largest telecoms in Taiwan to actually a group that was a one person who had built an extension that was able to, combat disinformation. And so we saw that spectrum of everyone from one very well adept programmer to, a company with tens of thousands of people. And so I think as part of that, on our day 2, we did the exact goal of being able to introduce those capabilities to some of the larger tech platforms. On that day 2, we had Facebook, Microsoft, Google, all the ones you would imagine, as well as Line and PTT and some of the local actors in the environment, and making sure that there is availability for some of those large platforms to see some of those capabilities is, I think, one of the key areas. And again, not to keep going back, but making sure that there is visibility for that. So making sure that whether it's one of our tech demos or whether it's one of our tech challenges or whether it is, again, in Disinfo Cloud, making sure that that capability is visible to some of those larger actors, I think is key. And so hopefully, again, with the challenge that we're partnering for here, I think that's a hopeful way of making sure that some of the smaller actors are getting the visibility needed to potentially have their capability engaged with some of the larger platforms.
And then I guess another question in terms of the understanding the market, what are the size of awards that you've tended to see small businesses, startups getting in contracting, either with state or with other government agencies?
Speaking specifically to ours, so our tech challenges, generally speaking, we award grants of total $250,000 for each tech challenge. And that can be awarded to one company or up to 3 companies, depending on the performance of each tech challenge. And so, again, just to get down to concretes, we had 2 people who were awarded or who split the $250,000 purse in Taiwan. And so that's how we've done kind of the major outreach around tech challenges. But again, I don't want to speak to the wider spectrum because I think, you've seen smaller than that, and you can definitely see larger than that as well.
Okay. And I guess, just to place that in context of the SBIR programs that are out there, phase 1 for the open innovation topics tends to be about $50,000 for a 3-month period of performance, whereas a phase 2 ends up being around $750,000 for about a year-long period of performance. So I think that we actually covered a lot of the ground that we needed to during this webinar. I want to give all the panelists an opportunity to highlight what they think sort of the big picture messages that competitors should walk away with, either in terms of the way how they should be framing their case, what they should be focusing on, or if you prefer to talk about the broader challenge that our country and really the global community is facing with what's happening in this sort of disinformation environment. Mike, do you want to start it off, and we'll kind of go round robin?
Yeah, I'll be quick. So some of the key themes that I heard that I liked the questions. One, the recognition that this may be a tool that enables collaboration to build a common picture, vice an individual one-stop shop. When I've seen that, I've seen multiple organizations, entities, companies try and build that, and we haven't quite gotten there. Also, technology is different, but I am convinced that this is more of a collaborative piece. And just to break it down, I talked about the kind of the information arc, starting with where does it begin? What is the broad narrative that you're seeing kind of at the top of the arc? Where is it fanning out, and where is it going between social media, traditional media, and you're seeing the trends in the information? And then where is it coming down on those specific target audiences? I think limiting it to that, not getting into something that's doing activity, just the evaluation and assessment piece, focused totally on PAI. This is not Intel support to information operations. This is publicly available information. This is open source information, so that the practitioners can go and ask more refined questions to the Intel side off of the things that we're seeing. And also so we can provide a broad overview, that common operating picture to our leadership that are making and decision makers to help them make better, more informed decisions.
That's great. Christina, do you want to go next?
Sure. Just very quickly to emphasize actually what Mike was saying, it's very difficult for one tool to do everything, clearly. And I think this challenge in particular offers an opportunity to see what tools can work together, how companies might be able to collaborate. And even if, you know, a company isn't aware of other tools or companies out there, we can help facilitate that potential collaboration, and we're very happy to. So we'll be interested to see what partnerships we can create here.
Sam?
Yeah, just adding on that. I mean, I think the one thing that we tend to think about a lot is the scalability. You know, obviously to figure out, this is a big problem, and so figuring out ways that we can take kind of a novel solution, making it work at scale, I think is always something that's kind of in the back of my mind. Just because, you know, again, I mentioned this earlier, but I think this is probably going to be a challenge that we see kind of continuing in the near term. So figuring out ways that we can take whatever the tool or functionality is and either plug it into another system or make it replicable and usable on a you know, larger distribution system is a way that I think we can have the most impact or the most dent to the problem, if you will.
That's great. JD?
Yep. First of all, you know, thanks to everybody for being here. We're really, again, very interested in what you have to offer. You know, I talked early on about the sort of expanse of different technologies that are out there. I think this effort is particularly focused on detection and warning of disinformation online. And I'll just mention very practically that you know, we have still not seen a system that automates that entire process. And so, you know, we don't expect to see a system that fully automates that entire process, but we want to see the move toward a more complete and more effective solution. So we want to be able to see where the narratives are coming from, and as Mike has said, you know, before they're really impacting the environment. We want to see them early. We want to have enough time to warn of them and take action against them. So I think, you know, those are sort of key thoughts behind the effort. Thanks.
Thanks. Hey, Pat, do you want to take a minute to sort of place these challenges in the context of sort of irregular warfare, urban operations, some of the themes that I know that you've had a great deal of focus on over the course of your career?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan, and thanks. I'll just take a step back and provide just a little bit of context and what I think is also points that speak to what the marketplace for this sort of thing is. Well, first of all, you've got a tremendous amount of urbanization going on across the world. The world's about 54% urbanized right now, roughly. And you've got more and more dense urban areas developing. And the so what there is that disinformation can actually lead to physical manifestations, whether it's riots, in certain cases, whether it's in the case of COVID, going back to a question that was asked earlier and answered. In the case of COVID, you may have people who are underreacting or overreacting based on disinformation. If they're underreacting, they should be taking protective measures for themselves and their communities that they're not, or there may be an overreaction. I'm not saying how that applies to COVID. I'm just saying that it can create the wrong behaviors, which then can lead to instability, can cut down on resilience of urban areas, for example. And the reason why I bring this up is, well, clearly we're operating from a DoD perspective here and State Department perspective here. There's also an interest in cities, whether it's New York City where I live and work, or it's any other cities around the world. That point at which disinformation creates physical manifestations makes it very real, very urgent. And I think that the questions were very good in this AMA, answers likewise. But I think that keeping in mind the context that this applies to not just the normal international competitions that always go on, whether it's between the US, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, whoever, but it also plays down to much more local levels. And at those local levels, I think you're more likely to see physical manifestations of this that can be very problematic. And that lends a sense of urgency to the challenge, but it also opens up, frankly, a market for others, such as cities, who are going to be interested in this kind of capability. Thank you.
Pat, I think that's really powerful, and I don't think that there's a better note for us to close out on. I want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time today to talk to the competitors about this countering COVID-19 disinformation challenge and the broader challenges faced by our society in countering disinformation more generally. If you have any questions that didn't get answered, you can take them to the innovatedefense.net/disinformation website, where we're hosting the challenge, and there's a Q&A section under resources. You can fill in your questions there. And I guess lastly, I want to thank the audience for showing up and participating in this, and hopefully providing solutions that make all of us a little bit safer. Thank you.